Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well on this quite cool and frosty morning. And welcome to our second Land Care Build Skills for this year. If you haven't seen my face before, my name's Eve, and I'm the Member Services Manager here at WALN. I'd also like to welcome Vanessa, our Land Care Expertise Exchange Facilitator, and Georgia, our new intern, who's joining us today from the WALN team. We are here to advocate, connect, support, and upskill the amazing network that is Community Land Care. But before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on beautiful Wajak Noongar Boodja, and I consider myself extremely fortunate to help restore this beautiful country. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend a deep respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders on the call today. I acknowledge their ongoing connection to land, sea, and sky as the world's oldest continuous living culture. Please acknowledge what country you're calling in from in the chat function. I'd love to see the diversity of what land we're all calling in from today. So we're all very excited about this session this morning. Thank you all for joining us. I'd love to welcome our speaker for today, Dr. Kit Prendergast. Dr. Kit, also known as the Bee Babette, is your go-to for all things native bees. She's published over 80 scientific articles, described 2 new species, written a book for creating habitat for native bees, and has worked with communities across Australia to provide an evidence-based approach to creating and restoring habitat for and monitoring our native pollinators. In recognition for her scientific contribution to preserving native bees and biodiversity, Kit was awarded the WA Young Tall Poppy Award and is a finalist in the Premier's Science Awards this year. Congratulations, Kit. It's my pleasure to hand over to Kit this morning. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and a pleasure to be connecting with all of you across country. So excited to be buzzing about native bees. I know we're all really passionate about our beautiful ecosystems, our wildflowers, and the creatures they support. And yeah, my speciality is the little buzzing friends that keep the ecosystems going. So yeah, I'm going to be talking to you about native bees and how we can better create habitats for them. So here's just 3 species of native bees. We've got Megachile monstrosa on my finger. He's one of the biggest Megachile bees, and I am completely safe with having him on my finger because male bees don't sting. So there's a lot of still fear, I think, a bit around bees, but our native bees, the females, they do have a stinger predominantly, but they won't sting you. I've never had a native bee come up and sting me while I'm doing research. So really lovely little guys and girls. In the middle is the Lipotrichis flavoviridis, and it's probably part of a species group, meaning that there's more than one species across the country that all look a little bit like this. So more taxonomic work needs to be done, and that's sort of a mantra when it comes to native bees. More taxonomic work needs to be done. And on the right there is Megachile oblonga, and she is collecting the beautiful resin from our Corimba calophylla, the marri. Now, eucalypt trees we know are iconic in Australian landscapes, and they support many fauna like the koalas and Carnaby's cockatoos, but they're also really important for our native bees. Many native bees specialize on eucs, so Eucalyptus, Corymbia, and Angophora, as well as Mitaceae like Melaleucas. And so if we don't have beautiful eucs and related Mitaceae across our landscapes, many of our native bees can't survive because they can only forage on the Mitaceae pollen. Not only are the eucalypts so important for nectar and pollen, but they also offer other resources like this beautiful resin. Many of our Megachile bees, as well as the Meliponini, the sugar bag bees, which aren't in southwest WA, but they're northern WA, Northern Territory, and along the east coast down to Sydney. They also collect resin. So the eucalypts are so important for so many aspects of bee nutrition. And the big old ukes, the ones that are really old, they are fantastic resources as well because they're often riddled with little holes that tiny wood boring beetles have made in them. And so like keeping even dead trees is actually super important for our native bees. So I do everything native bees and also other pollinators too, and birds I started off with birds actually and digging marsupials, but bees are now my speciality. Surveys, yes. Bushland remnants, residential gardens, and I found that, yeah, bushland remnants are so important for supporting native bee biodiversity, and that's why protecting bushland is really important. We can't just say, oh, like we can clear some habitat and put some houses in because we're going to plant some trees. Um, yeah, we need to protect our bushland. And I know I'm speaking to the already converted here. But I, yeah, help with bee-friendly native garden design, helping farmers enhance pollinators on their properties. I do a lot of SciComm, presentations like bees, native bee walks. So wildflower walks are really popular, but native bee walks are even more fun to me, at least. They're a bit more of a challenge because, native bees aren't stuck in the ground. Um, it does mean that the walk is probably more like a very slow shuffle because I just want to stop and look for bees all the time. And I do work with schools, I do bee hotel workshops, I have a circus performance about pollination, and then do photography, um, podcasts, anything native bees. So if you like native bees, these are all the ways you can follow along. Native bees, though, protecting them is really important. And unfortunately, a lot of what we hear about bees is based on an introduced bee species, which is not a very good representation of bee biodiversity. So most of us have grown up learning about the European honeybee, which, yeah, very different to our native bees, and helping honeybees doesn't really help our native bees. Honeybees are really different in their ecology, behavior, foraging preferences. They live in colonies that are active year round. For most of our native bees, they aren't active year round. In Southwest WA, native bees are only just starting to emerge. Saw my first native bee last week when we had a little spike in temperature and exonura. But yeah, generally we don't see native bees over winter. It's only when spring is coming, hopefully soon, that they start to emerge. Honeybees live in big colonies, and they have a eusocial structure where you've got a queen and her daughters are sterile and they do all the work, the foraging, the maintenance of the hive. And then the drones, they don't do anything except have sex and then die. So a bit useless. Our native bees, though, very different to that. Now, honeybees, they are an introduced species. They were introduced about 200 years ago with the European colonizers. And like most introduced plants and animals, cane toads, cats, foxes, um, many plants like lantana, whilst they are attractive to, European colonizers, they aren't very good for our indigenous landscapes and biodiversity. Honeybees occur in managed colonies as well as feral colonies, and these are when the managed colonies have swarmed and then take up hollows that our possums and our parrots need and usurp those hollows. So they're reducing the nesting resources that our birds really need. So not very good there. However, honeybees are really important for honey production and crop pollination. Most of our native bees don't make honey. Honey has been an important part of human diet since Homo sapiens. There's a theory that honey was at least partly involved in us evolving such large brains and being able to, complex thoughts because honey is a really high calorie food. And also, to find honey, you need quite good cognitive abilities. In Africa, there's even this amazing relationship between hunter-gatherers and a bird, and the bird finds a honeybee colony and calls to the hunter-gatherers, and they call to each other, and it leads them to the colony, and then the hunter-gatherers get the honey, and then the bird gets the grub. So obviously, this sort of relationship doesn't just develop overnight. So it shows we've had this really long history with honey producing bees, and bees that produce honey have important parts of human culture throughout history in South America. the little Meliponene bees there there's even a goddess based on one of the Meliponene bees. And then in Australia, our First Nations people have had a long history with the Meliponene, sometimes called the sugar bag bees or the stingless bees. So really long cultural associations between bees that produce honey and those cultures throughout the world. However, not all bees produce honey, most actually don't. Honey is nectar that's got the excess water evaporated off it and some bee enzymes added to it, and only eusocial bees produce honey. It's a surplus that's stored in the colonies. We have 11 described species that produce honey in Australia in two genera, the Tetragonula and the Ostroplegia, and you can actually keep these in little hives as well. They only make small amounts of honey, and it's quite different to European honeybee honey. It's a lot more watery, it's got a unique sugar in it, and it tastes more citrusy. It's also way more expensive, like $200 a jar. So it's a niche niche market there for if you have money. Now, Australia's honeybee industry is worth a lot for honey, but also crop pollination services. Many insects can pollinate crops, but many of our native bees, they are specialists, so they won't visit crops. But we've got many other insects that are crop pollinators, like flies. Flies are actually very good pollinators of quite a few crops. We've also got wasps, butterflies, and some generalist native bees. But the thing with honeybees, though, is that they are really abundant. You can manage them in hives, you can move them into cropping landscapes, move them out once the crop is finished flowering, which is actually not really a good thing from a biodiversity perspective because there's less, I guess, incentive to ensure that there's native flowers flowering in these landscapes throughout the year. Because if you can just move a hive in and then move it out once the crop stops flowering, yeah, there's less incentive. But we need to actually really be managing our landscapes more to both support honeybees in these landscapes so that they don't have to be moved around, which is stressful for them, and don't have to be moved into places that really should actually be for conservation. But yeah, really good for crop pollination. They're not necessarily the best pollinators per visitation. In fact, there's a lot of research that shows on a per visit basis, honeybees actually aren't the most effective or efficient pollinators, but they make up for it for their sheer abundances. 10,000 individuals in a honeybee hive, that might be the total number of individuals of a native solitary bee in an area. So make up for their abundance. They can also fly really long distances too. So that means that again, you can have bigger crop fields potentially, which isn't really that great from a biodiversity perspective. So again, this is why we need to distinguish between maximizing crop pollination with honeybees versus conservation of insect biodiversity. And these two things don't necessarily align. The WA beekeeping industry is worth a lot. WA has the healthiest honeybees in probably the whole entire world. We don't have Varroa mite yet. We do have, generally quite good landscapes. We are an internationally recognized biodiversity hotspot. We have a lot of bird pollination, so a lot of plants do flower throughout the year. And yeah, it's a really good place for honeybees, but also biodiversity as a whole. So again, making sure that we balance these two comp sometimes competing goals, conservation and crop pollination and honey production. And the reason why this is really important as well is that honeybees can outcompete our native bees. So this is some of the research publications of mine. I've done reviews as well as empirical research. The honeybees don't outcompete bees everywhere all the time. Competition occurs, resource competition, when there's a limited amounts of resources in the environment and you've got a dominant competitor, the honeybee, and it will outcompete the native bees when you've got a reduced carrying capacity in the environment, such as when you've got land clearing, you've got fewer native flowering plants due to drought or fire or agriculture, and you've got a dominance of like plants that are exotic that might boost up the honeybees, and then you've got a reduced number of native flowers. So helping reduce the competition involves making sure that there's lots of native flowering plants especially those that are visited by native bees, and managing honeybee densities in a way that's in line with the carrying capacity of the environment and having refugia for our native bees. Um, so very important to sustainably manage honeybees within environments. Our native bees are incredibly diverse and beautiful. We have over 2,000 species. There's currently over 1,730 described native bee species, about 800 in Western Australia, and almost all our species only occur in Australia. We do have some species that are outside of Australia, in Indonesia, so slight overlap. With the top end, but most of our native bees only occur in Australia. So a really important place here for global biodiversity. We have 5 out of the 7 global bee families. We don't have 2 families that occur in other parts of the world. We do have an entire family that's endemic, the Stenotrididae, which is pretty cool. And we also have entirely endemic subfamilies like the Euryglossinae. We also have a lot of coletids, and this is unusual because coletids are usually just a sort of minor component in other parts of the bee fauna across the world. So a few like examples, we've got the Amygilla up there. Amygilla are a genus of native bees that are big and chunky and are really good at buzz pollination, which is something honeybees can't do. Buzz pollination has evolved numerous times in many plant families. The most classic is the Solanaceae, such as our tomatoes, bush tomatoes, things like that. And they require to be vibrated at the right frequency for the pollen to be released. Quite a few native bees can do buzz pollination, but Amygilla are the best because they tend to be a bit bigger and they really like buzz pollinated plants. This one here, though, this is on a salvia, and it's a male bee, and he is not pollinating the plant. He's actually nectar thieving. He's sticking his tongue through the base of the plant and not touching the plant's reproductive part. So he's being a bit of a nectar thief. So, like, bees aren't always pollinators, but that's the other thing. We need to stop saying, let's conserve bees because they pollinate 1 in 3 bites we eat, which actually isn't true. The 1 in 3 bites is just a slogan that's thrown around and has no actual backing. But yeah, we need to stop moving from that mindset of let's conserve these things because they do this particular service. And let's conserve these creatures because they are another species on this incredible planet that we happen to share with them. And they have so many other functions, some that we don't even know about. And so conserving this biodiversity ensures that we've got healthy ecosystems for us and all the other plants and animals. That's my little TED talk there. The other one on the right there with the beautiful red eyes, that is Megachile orifrons. The Megachile are a group of in my opinion, some of the cutest bees. They are the ones that use bee hotels a lot. They tend to be really good pollinators because the females have scopae, which are the pollen collecting hairs, on the underside of the abdomen, which is a really great place for collecting pollen and the pollen getting brushed off onto the female parts of the flowers. In the middle is Lipotriches. These are ground nesting bees. They are generalist bees and they tend to be quite common in agricultural areas because they're generalists and because there's quite a bit of bare soil around there. So yeah, often quite good for pollinating crops. On the bottom left there, that is Hylaeus. It's Hylaeus rufosceps calamundae. And it looks a little bit like a wasp to most people. Definitely a bee. It's one of the bees that swallows pollen and then vomits it back up the nest. So it's lost those pollen collecting hairs. Many of our Hylaeans and Euryglossinae, which also do the swallow and vomit into the nest, lack scopae and also often specialists of Mitaceae. The one on the bottom right there, that is a Stenotrididae. That one's Stenocletes smaragdinus. They also often specialize on native plants. They are only found in natural areas foraging on native plants, and that family is endemic to Australia, so it makes sense that they specialize on native plants. And that's just a small snapshot of the incredible diversity we have of our native bees. There are many native bees that are undescribed, and also Many groups have no taxonomic keys, so it's quite hard to ID them out. Some of the keys are very old. So just before this, I was trying to ID a bee, and the key has no photographs in it. So it's very, very tricky, and you have to just try and like understand what they're talking about. So yeah, taxonomy is very tricky. And that's another thing, like we can't just rely on taking a photo and uploading it to iNaturalist. Because there's so many undescribed species and the diagnostic characters are often microscopic, there can be a lot of misidentifications when it comes to iNaturalists. So just be a bit cautious. And what we don't want to do is everyone like jumping on and agreeing on an identification when we can't show like how it's accurate, because then we can lead to misinformation about the distribution of species, like thinking that it's actually more widespread than it actually is, or ignoring, say, the taxonomic diversity among species. We might think that there's just one when it's a very common species, when it's actually numerous species that just keep being identified as a common species. So just to be a little bit cautious when it comes to identifying native bees or relying on iNaturalist for identifications. There's also quite a few synonyms, which is where a species has been described more than once. And this can be like not only due to species descriptions being done, decades ago when there was no photographs, but also male and female bees look really different sometimes. And when you've got species that's got quite wide distributions and disjunct distributions, you can have a species being described twice, once from the male, once from the female. And thanks to DNA barcoding, we're actually able to resolve these issues. But yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. I just want to draw attention to Leoproctus zephyr, which is a species that I'm really passionate about because I described it. I named it after my beautiful dog Zephyr, and it only occurs in 7 locations on the Swan Coastal Plain. It specializes on Jacksonia. So that's the only plant it will forage on. It really loves Jacksonia sericea. There's been a handful of records on Jacksonia furcellata and another Jacksonia species, but sericea is its favorite. And even in places where there is sericea doesn't necessarily mean it's there, probably because, so much of the Swan Coastal Plain, 60% have been cleared. But just emphasizes how important it is to understand the foraging requirements of particular bee species. And when we're planting for pollinators, we should be focusing on the specialists, because the generalists, they're generalists, so they can forage often on the plants that specialist bees forage on. But it's not the opposite. Specialist bees, they can only forage on these particular plants. So those are the ones we should be targeting when we're doing restoration for pollinators. This species, I have put it up for assessment on both the IUCN Red List, which is great, but also the IUCN Red List carries no legislative protection. I think I've put about 10 species on there. So if you search on the IUCN Red List, and then search bees in Australia, you'll see the listings come up there. But sadly, it doesn't translate into the EPBC Act. On the EPBC Act, we only have 3 species listed. I have put in a nomination for Leoproctus zephyr, but this means that for other native bees, even if they're rare or specialized, no one has to do a survey for them or consider them in any environmental offsets when there's land clearing or mining or clearing habitat for a car park or anything. So that is, a problem facing native bees, is that there's so few that are actually listed as threatened. Doesn't mean that they aren't threatened. It's like a huge process. It took me like, a week or two dedicated time just to compile all the data and put it together an assessment, and hopefully it will go through. Also, native bees, they're currently not considered short-range endemics. So short-range endemics are species that have limited dispersal capabilities and occur over a limited area. And at the moment, it mainly focuses on things like millipedes and trapdoor spiders. because bees fly, I think there's this assumption that they're not short-range endemics. For some of our bees, though, that are really tiny, like 3 millimeters long, their foraging ranges are probably only about 100 meters, and it has to be within their nest, within the radius of their nesting substrate as well. So they really should be considered short-range endemics, but they're not. So again, they're left out of these environmental monitoring, especially when it comes to looking at impacts of particular developments or having any sort of offset policies. But that's why having people like you guys to help create habitat for them, restore habitat for them is so important, because they're not part of, you know, government policy and legislation. Having community step in is really important. Now, our native bees, mainly solitary, so they don't live in colonies. They solitary and social, sort of like a spectrum. So we've got pure solitary, where each female has her own nest. Then we've got some where they will share a nesting hole entrance, but each will have her own nest within the burrow. Then we've got some that will cooperatively care for their offspring together. And then we've got the eusocial ones, where you've got that advanced form of sociality. Our native bees range in size from the smallest in the world, about 2 millimeters long, up to some really big chunks like the Xylocopa coptortozoma up north. And yeah, they can be really fuzzy or not fuzzy at all. So lots and lots of diversity there, which is why a one size fits all approach, if we're just focusing on honeybees, for example, isn't going to help the diversity of native bees who have different foraging requirements and nesting requirements. We are facing a crisis in native bee conservation, but it's going under the radar. I think few of you will have seen headlines about native bee conservation or declines, but I think almost everyone, I'd say everyone, has seen headlines about honeybees and Varroa mite. Honeybees are at no risk of going extinct in Australia or anywhere in the globe. Globally, they're actually increasing in numbers. The only place where there's been more hive losses than hive increases is in the US. But even there, where they've got Varroa, feral honeybees are also prolific. So there's no risk that honeybees, feral or managed, are going to go extinct. But there is a real risk our native bees are going to go extinct. Some research by Invertebrates Australia suggested that, you know, invertebrates in Australia are going extinct all the time, but because we're not monitoring them, we're not even aware of this crisis. The great thing, though, is that we do have enough knowledge on how we can help our native bees. And it's just about sharing that knowledge and better monitoring native bees, so that we can make a real change. I mentioned earlier, many of our native bees specialize in mitaceae. So having some eucalypts. They don't have to be huge ones. We've got some gorgeous little mallees that are also really attractive to native bees. Having some eucalypts across our landscapes is really important. Lots of native bees also specialize on fabaceae. This includes the Trichocoletes, which are early season bees. These bees will start to be coming out about now. So look out on your Hardenbergia and your Divisia. You might see some little Trichocoletes. They are very fast, but yeah, really cute as well. They also visit by being fooled into visiting our donkey orchids, and you might see them with the little pollinia stuck to their heads, which is really cute. And yeah, really important pollinators of our orchids, which we all love. uh, then we've also got other plants that are great for native bees that are more like low-lying substrates, like the Rhodanthe and the Hemiandra, little bushes like Westringia. But yeah, planting native is really the best thing you can do for native bees. There are some exotic plants that are visited by generalist bees, like some salvia, the Duranta repens, the amygdala visit that a lot, gazanias, basils, and brassicas, but not canola. My postdoc was on canola, and hardly any native bees at all visit canola. I don't think we've even recorded one in Western Australia visiting canola. So that's why protecting the native vegetation around the canola fields is really important. And, you know, this isn't just based on presumptions. My research is showing that native flowers are definitely preferred by native bees, and honeybees also prefer native flowers because of our eucalypts, which are such a prolific source of nectar and pollen for flower visiting animals as a whole. So that's why I'm such a huge fan of eucalypts. Now, we also need nesting substrates for our native bees. We can't just provide them with food if they've got nowhere to reproduce. And the best thing we can do for our above ground nesting bees is keep big old trees, keep dead trees. But, a lot of our big old trees have been cleared, and it can take decades for them to grow from a little seed or a little sapling that we put in and reach that big girth, have some little wood boring beetles go in there, evacuate, and then the native bees can finally use them. So we can help speed up the augmentation of habitat for them with bee hotels. Bee hotels just replicate this. Simply get a block of untreated wood and drill some holes in it, or get some untreated bamboo. It's really important the hole diameters, though, are range of diameters and also aren't more than 10 millimeters. Lots of the commercial available bee hotels, the holes are generally too big. And we also want to be careful about buying ones that are imported from Australia and probably been treated with chemicals, to prevent pests coming into Australia, but also we don't know the longevity of these chemicals in them. So quite easy to make one yourself. And you just install it about head height in a fairly sunny location that doesn't get baked though in summer. I have had a lot of success just putting them on the eaves under my garage port or under my veranda. Um, on my fence post, so they like that and don't have it too shaded with like vegetation over the top. But yeah, the bees will come and use them. And I had 21 different species use bee hotels in my research in Southwest WA around Perth. And I also use bee hotels as a bushfire recovery tool in the Jarrah forest after the fires. And there's a high uptake of the bee hotels there as well. So if you design them well, they will be used. And it's a good opportunity to see the native bees as well, because they have to keep coming back to your bee hotel. So it's a great chance to spot them. The majority of bees, though, about 63%, actually are ground nesting. So for these bees, we want to leave some patches of bare soil. We don't want to have thick layers of mulch over everything. And that's something where councils go wrong. They put mulch all over the ground, and this means that ground nesting bees can't nest in there. You don't have to have like completely bare ground. Like I see native bees just in a local park near me, nesting little bits of bare ground between grass patches. My PhD student on Lassioglossum dotatum, her research found that they prefer some bare ground with some like stones scattered over them, and they quite like it if it's near a source of water that's like underneath a evaporative cooling, for example, and the water's dripping down and keeping the soil a bit moist. For different species, they have different preferences. So the Amygilla, they like the soil with some clay in it, and Amygilla dorsoni actually nests in very clay soil in clay pans. But yeah, different species have different preferences. Because it's so hard to find the nests of ground nesting bees, this is still a big knowledge gap, as well as how to provide artificial nesting substrates for them. But I'm actually just starting up a citizen science project. I'll have to share the link with you once it's finalized, on creating habitat for ground nesting bees and seeing if they use it, and being able to provide a more evidence-based advice on providing habitat for our ground nesting bees. But in general, just leave some patches of bare soil and hopefully they'll come and nest in there. We also want to reduce toxins in the environment. We don't need to use pesticides in, our backyards. And really, we need to be way more careful with using pesticides in agricultural areas. Australia is very behind in our pesticide legislation. It's a big part of the EU. In Australia and really most parts of the world, the problem is as well that pesticide risk assessments are done on honeybees. Honeybees tend to be bigger than native bees. Their routes of exposure are different. So, if you're putting pesticides into the soil, honeybees aren't going to contact these, but the native bees that nest in the ground will. So we definitely need to have better risk assessments for pesticides and the impacts they have on our native bees. When it comes to herbicides, the issue is less black and white. Herbicides can be really important in removing exotic plants, especially exotic grasses, which, buffel grass is terrible for our landscapes. It smothers out the wildflowers. And sometimes, we do need to use herbicides, but when we use them, we should use them in a, way that's in accordance to the guidelines, and ideally use them outside of the foraging period of native bees. So not during spring and summer, maybe like at the end of winter when, all the weeds tend to sprout up after those winter rains, and try and get in there before the native bees emerge. Now, we also need to address the global issues facing native bees. So we can do a lot in our local patches, but there's also global issues that we can all do a part in reducing. Now, animal agriculture is the biggest form of land use in Australia and the biggest cause of habitat loss as well. And it also is not very compatible with native bees because pastures are grasses and they don't offer flowering resources for native bees. If you've driven through many of the livestock agricultural landscapes, there's not many trees there. There's not many wildflowers. There tends to be quite a few weeds as well. It's also the second biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in Australia, and contributes more greenhouse gas emissions than all forms of transport combined. So climate change is disrupting plant pollinator networks across the globe. We're seeing disruptions in the synchronicity. My colleagues have just published a paper on how particular native bees are quite vulnerable to rising temperatures, especially those that are cavity nesting. And we're seeing shifts in plant phenology that aren't keeping up with bee phenology. In Australia, what we're seeing is a lot of drought and also wildfires. And climate change, through increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, is altering the nectar and pollen chemistry of the plants as well. The good thing is, though, that this is something that all of us can contribute to through reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and altering our diet is a very easy way that we can all work towards reducing our climate, land, and water use footprint. Citizen science is also a really powerful way of helping with insect conservation. As I said, identifying bee species is not very accurate through photographs on iNaturalist, but you can still identify things generally to genus. We can look at phenology, and other things that are really useful for citizen science is things like looking at the flowers that bees are visiting, looking at the other floral resources that bees use. I've got a iNaturalist project on the leaves that some megachili use. And so if you see some leaves in your garden or on your bushwalk that have some perfect semicircles cut out of them, take a photo of the nommed up leaf as well as the plant, because at the moment we actually don't have a database on the leaves that megachili use. So we need to think of these like other resources, not just food, but they often use, as I said at the start, things like resin, things like plant leaves in their nests. So considering those other parts of their ecology. I had, when I was doing my PhD, a look at where people were seeing bees in gardens and bushland reserves, and a bee hotel monitoring project, which my master's student did her thesis on. And there's so many other opportunities as well, working together to better understand, protect, and manage landscapes for our native bees. If you want to learn more about making bee hotels, as well as a list of some great plants for native bees, I have a book called Creating a Haven for Native Bees, and it's got a list of some great genera. If you're looking for some good like places to get the plants, obviously your local Bunnings won't have many, but Apace and Fremantle and Xantheria Nursery and Maidavale are two fantastic nurseries, as well as down in Bunbury. I think it's going through a restructure management, but there's the LCN plant nursery is really good there as well. But anywhere that sort of like specializes in native plants. If you want to learn more about IDing bees, I have a crash course in bee taxonomy and identification. And this is really great to, there's a bit of a sense of achievement in IDing something rather than just relying on AI. And I'm also working with a paper with some colleagues where we were tested LLMs to identify bees and also draw bees. And they were not very good. So we still need humans for this. Uh, Now is a fantastic time to go see Amygdala dorsoni, which is one of my favorite bees. It's the ones in my background. The male was just mating with my head like the whole entire presentation. But they are amazing bees. They were my gateway bees. Unfortunately, or fortunately, they're getting quite popular, but we really need to respect their, you know, privacy, I suppose, and just let them do their thing without going onto the clay pan in droves and destroying their nests. But they are incredible bees. Now this is a little mural, and if you're a fan of Gardening Australia or Costa, you may have seen him wearing this on a t-shirt, but it's a great selection of plants that cater to a diversity of native bees. So if you have all these plants in your garden, you're doing pretty good because you've got buzz pollinated plants, the Dianella, that our buzz pollinated bees will visit. You've got some more open flowers like the Scavola. You've got the bottlebrush, the Melaleuca, which is really attractive to heaps of native bees. Ukes, which are attractive to heaps of native bees. If you want a smaller metaceae, the Thryptomene is great. Banksias are good. Not only are they visited by birds, they're bird pollinated, but quite a few native bees also visit the Banksia. There's actually an undescribed tiny native bee in Southwest WA that I've only collected on Banksia. It's undescribed, so it's on my to-do list when I get funding time to describe. But just shows you that also this idea of pollination syndromes is useful for the plant's perspective of who pollinates it, but when it comes to who visits it, not necessarily. So a common myth is that red flowers are visited by birds and not by bees, but I'm sure anyone that's seen a red callistemon, which I think is now actually Melaleuca, but the red Melaleucas, so many native bees on them. Calithamnus quadrifidus, native bees visit that. There's actually a native bee called Euhesma tubulifera that only visits Calithamnus quadrifidus. It's like the most specialist bee in Australia. And it's evolved mouth parts that are longer than its body so it can access the nectar. So this incredible case of plant pollinator coevolution. The aromophilas are also fantastic. The Amygdala love them. There's also some Euryglosinae that specialize on aromophila. Native peas, many native bees specialize on the native peas. The trichocoletes, lots of megachili love them. Lassiglossin love them. Hybertia is also buzz pollinated, so that's another great one there. And the everlasting daisies provide a good annual source of an open shaped flower. So that selection will give you lots of different native bees, different genera. And it's also available in a t-shirt, and I've got a Redbubble store that has various designs on there as well. Often great conversation starters. I was going for a little walk yesterday and I had my native bee backpack on, and someone saw it and was like, oh, that's an interesting backpack. I'm like, well, native bees. So yeah. I've also got some bingo cards, so you can go out and try and find the common species around your region. I've got ones for Southwest WA and other parts in Australia. And if you want more information on native bees, also walkthroughs on making bee hotels, I've got some videos where I step you through that process with the wooden bee hotels as well as the bamboo bee hotels on my YouTube channel. Now, our native bees, as I said, they're quite neglected. There's no overarching strategy in Australia on protecting native bees. And so in my spare time, whenever I get a chance, I'm actually working on creating an Australian native bee and pollinator conservation strategy. Because at the moment, community groups like Landcare, they don't really know where to go to get accurate information. What are the resources that native bees need? How can we create habitat for them? And also, work with policymakers to get native bees into restoration. I read the restoration guidelines for Western Australia, and pollinators are mentioned once, and that just said pollinators. So that's not really restoring landscapes if we're neglecting the pollinators from them. We also need to monitor our native bees and assess species for listing as threatened. So it's really hard to make a good case for listing a species as threatened if there's no monitoring. So having expert-led monitoring is really important. We don't have a monitoring program for native bees in Australia. And we also need native bees in education So I think many of us grew up never hearing about native bees. I certainly didn't. So having native bees in school curriculum, I've just finished writing and illustrating some books on native bees for kids, because, I think it starts when we're children that we get interested in biodiversity. And if we never hear about native bees, we're not going to care. We're not going to grow up to, you know, make sure that our habitats have native plants. So having native bees in educational curriculum, in TAFE courses, in university, I think is so important. And yeah, making sure that when we allocate protected areas or restore areas, the pollinators are a component of that. Currently our protected areas in Australia aren't based on or even threatened ecological communities. We don't know the native bees there. So making sure that native bees aren't left out of these conversations and making sure that we secure habitat for them. And this is entirely possible. Australia is one of the very few countries that doesn't have a pollinator strategy. There's a pollination strategy being developed, but boosting pollination, as I mentioned earlier, isn't the same as conservation. And my postdoc, which is finishing this month, was on canola pollination. And what I found is that a lot of the native insects won't visit the canola, and things that help canola, for example, um, having more overall generalist insects and having, say, some exotic weeds around the canola, that's fine. But if we want to conserve native bees, what we really need to do is protect those areas of bushland, even if the visitors to canola don't visit some of the wildflowers that those trichocolets only visit Divisia. They never went into the canola. The visitors on canola weren't visiting Divisia, but if we lost those Divisia, we would lose the trichocolets. So making sure that we have a pollinator conservation. Boosting pollination and supporting crop growers is really, really important as well. And there can be overlaps, but we need to make sure that the conservation of these rare and specialist bees aren't neglected. So that's what I'm developing. If you want to support the development of this, we are looking to starting up an organization where, in discussions whether we should start up our own one or ask if another organization can take us under their wing, say Invertebrates Australia, Ecological Society of Australia. But we're looking either way to start up an organization so people have somewhere to go to for pollinator information and create this strategy and oversee it. So that's exciting. But at the moment, it's all just like spare time. So if you want to support this, I've got a Patreon and I also put heaps of resources up there. I've got videos on ground nesting bees. I've got all my publications and plenty of resources there, taxonomy articles. So that's your go-to resource at the moment. And if you want to learn about pollination in a way that's less textbooky, but just as accurate, I have a fringe show called The Birds and the Bees. It is probably 18 plus, so don't show this to your kids. But it's a very fun way of getting people interested and exciting about pollination and bees and sexual mimicry and wasps that bog flowers and orchid collecting bees that collect perfume from orchids. So anyone that loves pollinators, flowers, anything like that, this is the show for you. Finally, I am a finalist in the WA Scientist of the Year Premier Science Awards, and there is a People's Choice. I would be really grateful if you could please vote for me, especially because like the finalists and a lot of the people awarded are, in the medical space, and medical stuff is so important. Like when I watch shows that were based in, even 100 years ago, I'm like, we've come so far in medical treatment. But it'd be great to have like, someone in the environmental space be awarded because the conservation space is really underfunded. I'm sure you all know. And so having like a recognition that environment matters and the science of the environment really matters would be amazing. Not just for like, even if it was someone else, I'd be really happy if, yeah, the environment was recognized more. So thank you everyone for crash course into native bees and helping restore landscapes for them. I had a publication that was published 2 days ago on how to design seed production areas for pollinators, which also is very applicable generally for creating areas for pollinators, looking pollination, order some good companion plants for them. So you can check that out as well. And just send me an email if you want a copy of that, because it's supposed to be open access, but it isn't. So I'll just send you a PDF.
Oh, thank you so much, Kit. Thank you not only for sharing your knowledge and your experience, but also all of those amazing resources with us. And I'm sure some of that will probably go out to attendees post session. We can probably just chat about that. But yeah, I just wanted to jump straight into the questions in the chat. Everyone, please feel free to unmute yourselves. We've got a question about eastern states eucalypts. Are they beneficial to our local species as well?
Yes, they actually are. So some people get really concerned that they can't get like their local plant species that's local to their, area. When it comes to pollinators, the most important thing is really like the genus rather than your local variety. I've actually found that Angophora, which isn't even a genus in Western Australia, is actually really attractive to many of our native bees. So yeah, eastern states ukes are fine. Like if you can get a local uke, that's great. It's probably better adapted to the climate and soil type. But if all you can get is an eastern state uke, that is fine. If you have an eastern state uke on your street, please don't like chop it down. As I said, the Angophora, I actually see lots of native bees foraging on them. I haven't seen as much on the Queensland box tree. I've only seen a few. They have like quite different flowers than
Mm.
our, you know, usual ukes here in WA. But yeah, the Angophora is actually quite attractive. And the Eucalyptus citradora, lots of native bees visit that one.
Oh, we've got a question from Mike Norman saying, what threat is the Varroa mite to native bees?
So it doesn't not a threat to native bees, which is fantastic. There is some evidence that some of the viruses can be shed onto flowers from honeybees that have them and then picked up by native bees, but we don't have, like, it doesn't appear to be causing that much harm to our native bees. More research is needed, but unlikely. Actually, it might overall be a good thing for native bees if it's reducing the amount of feral colonies. There are going to be, and there have been already, lots of feral colony losses, but we're not going to see, like, nowhere in the world has feral colonies gone extinct, but we will see, especially the, like, invasion front losses of feral colonies because they're not being managed. Um, but that might have some good outcomes for the native fauna if that's reducing the amount of competition. So
Mm.
overall, neutral impacts. Some suggestion it could have some benefits, could have some negative things if there's like virus spillover, but there's not much evidence of that so far.
I imagine this is probably similar to the East Coast ukes, but hybrid native plants from nurseries, are they also providing kind of pollinator benefit, I guess, with their nectar content and stuff as well?
So that really depends on the particular hybrid. So some plants, if they've been hybridized to have like double petals that reduce the accessibility of nectar, um, might be a bad thing. But sometimes when they're bred to have like bigger petals and showier petals, they might be more attractive. When it comes to like what happens to the nectar and pollen, there's not much like research into that. So could have like negative impacts or beneficial impacts. What I found interestingly with the grevilleas is that the Robin Gordon grevillea, I've never seen native bees go to it. Like honeybees definitely do. Our honey eaters do. Then some of the other grevillea varieties that are, hybrids, I've seen native bees go to them. There's quite a few Eremophila hybrids, and I've seen native bees go to those. So yeah, I think it's a bit context dependent depending on like what's happened with the hybrid. Is it like different color, petal shape? Um, yeah, so there's no sort of overall good bad.
Awesome. Please feel free to either pop your hand up or just ask a question generally if you'd like. We'd also like to ask anyone in the session if they're in the process of applying for native bee survey funding, or if that's something that's on the horizon or something that you'd like to do. And yeah, feel free to just talk us through that a little bit if you'd like as well. Mike, yeah, go for it.
Thank you, Kit. Sorry, I was a little bit late for your start because I was actually doing on-ground work on Thursday mornings. Um, your comment about bee hotels was very interesting because I'll just show you something here. I bought this from Bunnings the other day, and because I'm a bit short for time and didn't have time to build my own. Firstly, there's a large number of holes the same size, which I don't like. And secondly, a lot of the ones at the top are too big. So what I'm going to do is fill the big ones and re-drill them with a smaller hole based on what you said today. So thank you for that information. I can see now this is not the right thing to buy. This is what they're selling at Bunnings, all right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, Secondly, with the young the scientist of the year voting, you've got that on a Facebook page, have you?
Um, I have the QR code. If you have your phone, you can just like scan it, and then I can also um like ask Eve to like send you the link, or I also like can reshare it on my Facebook page as well.
Yeah, because if you put on your Facebook page, because I'm on Facebook, I'll share it to my contacts. All right.
Oh,
So,
awesome.
so
Yes,
if
I
you
can
put
do
on
that. Yeah.
Facebook, I'll find you under Kit, and then I'll
Yeah.
share it. All right. Thank you.
Awesome. No, I really appreciate that.
Awesome. Donna Lee, do you want to talk through what you're thinking?
I'm sorry because I also missed a portion of your presentation, Kit, but I'm looking forward to the recording. Fascinating information, and bees are so important. So, we're doing a project out in the Central Desert, so 2 days drive from Perth, and we've found a blue banded bee body. But we would love to start monitoring native bees, given the lack of people in the space, and we've got cameras and various things. So if it's an opportunity to talk to you, Kit, about how best to do that, that would be great. Or maybe I'll just look on your website or read and watch this thoroughly again, so because I've missed pockets of it. So that would be really great. But yeah, important work, and thank you for all you do, Kit. It's very important.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And yeah, if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to like discuss, yeah, monitoring program. Um, yeah, like the Central Desert hasn't been surveyed as much. The closest I've been is probably Pernalulu, the Bungle Bungle Ranges. I did
Okay.
some surveys there. What's interesting is like such a different bee fauna to Southwest WA.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely the Amygilla there. So which is sometimes called blue banded bees. The most
Oh,
common species here is Amygilla chlorocyania, but the one that is up there is Amygilla mariensis. So yeah, even like the particular blue banded bees are different in these different regions.
okay. Excellent.
Ash from Friends of Coolbeania Bushland has asked if there's any suggestions for potential funding sources for native bee surveys. Me and Kit were having a brief chat about this in our little pre-session chat, but we kind of, I mean, we'd be also interested to hear from the community if anyone's had any luck, but it would be interesting. What I'll do is I'll reach out to Leslie from Friends of Joderup and see how they've funded it. But I imagine, and me and Kit were kind of saying that it'll probably be, I guess, a component of maybe the grant funding that you are all probably already familiar with, whether that be like lotteries or a part of a state NRM grant, or through kind of those more philanthropic avenues like Wetton Hall. I'm just waiting on confirmation from the Ween Bee Foundation. They do funding for community groups to do plantings, but they may, I guess, be able to segment that into surveys and plantings. So yeah, that will kind of be a bit of an evolving piece of work. We could probably put that into our monitoring section on the Knowledge Hub too. So keep an eye on that, and we'll keep you all updated if we get any updates with that kind of stream of funding. Mike says all conservation groups should rename themselves as a sporting club, then we would get lots of funding. That is true.
Well, I also think that sporting clubs should get in on restoration and monitoring. So, like in my work on developing Australian native bee and pollinator conservation strategy, I've been reading all the strategies internationally, and one of the really good ones is like the All Island Pollinator Plan, and sporting clubs are one of their stakeholders. And yeah, you need like the football field or whatever to be grass, but like around that, what's stopping you from creating like bushland around it? One of the best patches of bushland I know of is actually around a dog park in, where is it? It's like near Armidale. So it shows that, yeah, like they don't have to be two separate things. And sporting clubs, like they should be mascots or something. So I think there's opportunities there. And yeah, like let's get sporting clubs funding this sort of thing.
Yeah, agreed. Have we got any more questions from the audience? If you want to put your hand up or just give us a holler. Oh, looks like we're good. Yeah, we will send out Kit's presentation. You'll get a link to the recording post-session. And if you have any questions, we can just kind of keep, I guess, working on developing those resources. Kit asks, no, sorry, not Kit. Will workshops come to Bunbury anytime? That's a good question.
Yeah. Oh, so I actually was a Bunbury girl a few years ago. I lived in Bunbury, and it's such a special place for me. I got engaged in Bunbury. So whilst not per se like a workshop, I am doing two storytelling sessions for kids with my book, Amy the Amygella. And so there will be like a little bit of a how to create nesting habitat for the ground nesting bees as part of that. And I'm doing two at library, like Bunbury Library and also Winthrop Library. And then nearer to nature, which is in the Wellington State Forest near Bunbury, I'm also doing a storytelling session. And then I think we're making seed bombs. So if you have a child or a grandchild or can smuggle a child for a day, and I don't see why you can't come without a child. So yeah, they're fine for everyone. I'm sure everyone could appreciate it. But yeah, that's coming up like 1st and 2nd of October, I think the dates are. And I'm always like keen for anything down in Bunbury. I unfortunately I used to do quite a bit with the LCN nursery as well, but as I found out they've gone through some new management restructures and a lot of uncertainty there, but they were also some great ones. But yeah, hopefully I will be down at Bunbury more because it's, yeah, a really special place for me. Oh, and
we've
how
got a
will we
great
book them?
question from Patrick.
Um,
Yeah, how to book them. That's what we've
yeah.
got.
I don't think the booking links are live yet. I just had an email with the library yesterday, but I will be sharing them on my Facebook group, the Buzz and Wild Bees. So just stay tuned for that, and I'll try and
Awesome.
share them on other Bunbury groups too.
Awesome. And are you happy for us to pop your email in the just like post-event resources?
Yeah, that's
Awesome.
fine.
And then there's just the other question about presenting to the prison system. Example, Carnet to a group of trainees doing the Cert 3 beekeeping course. Would be great to open their eyes to the world of native bees.
Yeah, I would love that too. A few years ago, I did a presentation to one of the youth prisons, and yeah, like I think native bees are for everyone. So yeah, if there's opportunities for that, send through whoever I need to contact for that. I'd be happy to.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, if that's all the questions we have for today, cool. Yeah, no worries, Patrick. We will wrap up for this morning. Thank you again so much, Kit, for joining us. I learned so much. Oh my gosh. And I feel like it's just amazing to have all of this knowledge in your brain so you can even see like the little nesting holes, the little volcano of soil when you like go around in your garden and stuff. It's just the best. Um, just wanted to let everyone know that we've got our annual gathering coming up in 2J. And we're going to be spotlighting all of the fantastic work that's being done in that Avon catchment area. And you'll be hearing from land care groups, from landholders, and just some incredible people doing incredible work out there. So we will also be emailing you out a link to join WALN's membership. If you are not already members, we'd love to have you. And thank you all so much for coming. I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.